Good morning, everyone. So good to be here in Antalya, and I welcome you to the second morning of this GSTC conference. My name is Natalie Kidd, and I'm a board member of GSTC and a member of the executive committee. And during my day job, I'm managing director for Asia of Intrepid Travel. This morning, we are here talking about inclusivity in tourism. Can you still hear me? I'm still good? Okay. One of the greatest opportunities we have in travel is to break down barriers. Through connecting people of different backgrounds and culture, the travel industry is unique in its ability to bring people together, to explore the differences across cultures, but most importantly, to show the similarities we all share. As an industry, travel employs 1 in 10 people globally. And in the last year, as we recover from the pandemic, 1 in 3 new jobs created were in tourism. According to the recent UNWTO report into women in tourism, we are told that 54% of people employed in tourism are women, versus 39% in the wider economy. But we must ask, in what roles are they employed, and are those numbers consistent in all of our destinations? Further, the gender pay gap is less in tourism. In tourism, women earn only 14.7% less than men, compared to 16.8% in the wider economy. Women are still paid less, there's still a gap, but it's less in tourism. Of government ministers, 25% of ministers of tourism are women, compared to only 20% represented by women in other portfolios. So in tourism, there are some things we are doing well, and yet there are still significant hurdles in making our industry inclusive. Inclusive to people not only of different genders, but of different age, ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation, physical ability, size, and so on. So we're here today to discuss and explore different perspectives and examples of inclusive tourism. Inclusive tourism offers positive travel experiences to people of all backgrounds and to those with different needs. It is also about creating access for all people to participate in a more equitable and diverse industry. The topic is broad, and so I'm sure we're going to see different perspectives. When we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, we might be talking about access to employment in the industry, or market access for communities, Indigenous communities, or supply chains. Or we could be talking about the ability to have accessible travel for people with different abilities and different needs, special needs, to partake in tourism. For many, diversity, equity, and inclusion came to the forefront following the Black Lives Matter movement. And looking back, now I would say it did for me too. At the time when people started talking about Black Lives Matter and the diversity of workforces, I felt I was in an organisation that was already doing pretty good. We have our vision, which was changing the way people see the world. We have recently changed it to changing the way we all see the world to make it more inclusive. We talked frequently about travel breaking down barriers. We had staff from over 70 different nationalities. We welcomed people of different sexual orientations into our offices and onto our trips. And we took many stands in different parts of the world to make travel more accessible for women to be employed. But still, the Black Lives Matter movement gave us cause to reflect. We debated whether to post the black square and support the cause. We wanted to be supportive, but we didn't want to be tokenistic. So importantly, at that same time, we pledged to do more. Inclusion, like so much of sustainability, is never done. It continues to evolve, and as we learn more, we learn there is more to do. So since 2020 at Intrepid, we have continued to address unconscious bias in our recruitment and employment processes. We have actively increased the number of Indigenous activities and suppliers in our supply chain. And we also introduced what we call our ethical marketing guidelines, which we designed to ensure that our marketing made a permanent change, not just a one-day change, a permanent change to be more inclusive. So people seeing our marketing imagery or reading our stories had a greater chance of seeing or hearing a person who was somewhat more like them. In 2022, we had more BIPOC, plus size, and LGBTQI travellers, content writers, and creators represented in our marketing than ever before. At the end of the year, we did a review, and it turns out that we did have so much more to do. Now we regularly review what we have achieved and find we still have so much more that we can do in the future. So without further ado, I'm pleased to introduce you to today's panelists, who I'm sure will challenge and inspire us with examples of what they're doing. We have Linda Manaby, Senior Sustainability Manager at Visit Sweden. Rika Jean-Francois, CSR Commissioner at IT Berlin and GSTC Board Member. Antonia Tavales, Chief Sustainability Officer for Accor Americas, and Dr. Charisse Adensal, Co-founder and Strategic Mentor for Regenerative Vanua. We're lucky today that joining Charisse is Mr. Jerry Spooner, Executive Director for Regenerative Vanua, who is going to take part in our Q&A as well. We'll hear from each of our speakers, and then we'll be moving into a Q&A. So just as a reminder, we'll be using slido.com. You can put in the hashtag GSTC2023 to pose your questions, which we'll be using to conduct our discussion at the end of the 4 speeches. So over to you, Linda.
Thank you very much. So my name is Linda Manaby, and I work for Visit Sweden. I'm passionate about sustainability, and I've worked in different industry in different roles with sustainability for the last 10 years. And for 1.5 years, I worked for Visit Sweden. And Visit Sweden has the official national assignment from our government to promote Sweden as a destination. I'm glad to be here in Turkey. I also have the privilege to be in GSTC in Sevilla. I met a lot of people, and I hope I will see you all in Sweden next year, because we are hosting GSTC in April in Stockholm. And I will speak about inclusion, but I will start from a Sweden perspective as a destination. But I will start in the external perspective, in the outside world. And as many of you know, there's much ongoing in the world, and the world is facing many global challenges. And we see challenges like war, we have inequality, and we have climate threats, and also polarization in the world. But what's good, though, is that our world leaders have come to an agreement, and we have now what I used to say, a global framework for sustainability. And we also have a plan. The Agenda 2030 gives us an overall picture of what actually global challenges we are facing. And in Sweden, we have worked a long time to build a society that is based on democracy and also a very advanced welfare system. And we have come a long way with the UN Global Goals. We have achieved already 75% of the UN Global Goals. And that's a very good foundation to stand on. But we also have challenges, of course. We have challenges like consumption, the environmental issues, social and economic exclusions. Above all, we think that tourism and travel is very important to meet those challenges we see in the world. It gives us new perspective. It also gives us new understanding for people and cultures and other religions. The strongest association with Sweden is the beautiful nature and the free and the open lifestyle. In Sweden, the nature is accessible to everyone. We call it the rights of public access, and we're very proud of it. And visitors that come to Sweden also appreciate the nature. Sweden is a small country when it comes to population and is situated in the north of Europe. But we have a growing population, and it's due to that we have high elderly population. We also have a high birth rate if you compare to the rest of Europe, and we have large immigration. And for those who didn't know, Sweden is very high on different international rankings. We have, for example, in social governance, in economic, in environmental, and also in tourism. And Sweden is actually the third most innovative country in the world, according to Global Innovation Index. And a good example of this in Sweden is that we have many small companies and businesses starting with the only thing in mind, and it's to solve the global challenges. And in northern Sweden, it used to be a depopulated area. There is a lot of green solution companies established right now, so it's becoming a thriving area. Sweden is also associated with social sustainability, equality and inclusion. And keywords like solidarity, democracy, gender equality is often connected with Sweden. And in Sweden, the hospitality industry is equal in terms of women and men. It's 53% women and 47% of men working in the hospitality industry. And the hospitality has twice as many female employees than in other sectors. And of course, this gives women a lot of new opportunities in leadership, in entrepreneurship and empowerment than in other sectors. Swedish society has also transformed into a relative short time to a society with ethical and cultural diversity. And in tourism, more than a third of the employees in hospitality industry has foreign background. And many larger hotel chains in Sweden are working actively to recruit both younger people, but also people with foreign background. And tourism and hospitality industry is really important in Sweden. It stands for about 2.7% of the GDP. And also in the larger context, it contributes to the development of the regions, of the local society, investment, services, and also the natural and cultural environment. And the former government launched a new strategy for Sweden, where they set out that we should be growing hospitality industry and make with a vision of being the world's most sustainable destination based on innovation until 2030. And Visit Sweden, where I work, we also aligned with this vision, of course, and we have a goal to create the most attractive destination by leading to a more purposeful travel. And we recently launched the brand platform with the hospitality industry to make a movement in the purposeful travel. We also work with others to contribute to strong and competitive businesses in Sweden, and we share a lot of knowledge to the companies in Sweden in the hospitality industry. And today the image of Sweden is multi-faced and more complex than before. New narratives challenge the old traditional image of Sweden, and Visit Sweden work a lot with different authorities in Sweden to develop and continue work with the image of Sweden. And the multicultural perspective is really important. To give you a couple of examples what Visit Sweden work when it comes to inclusion, we launched a guide last year for holidays in Sweden that is celebrated by over 50,000 different people. And it's tradition that comes from both midsummer to Persian New Year to African traditions. And the purpose was to inspire people to celebrate more holidays and how and where they could celebrate holidays. Another example from a couple of years ago was a bold example when Visit Sweden let citizens take over the official Twitter account of Sweden and let the citizens communicate and stand for the content. This was something to bring in new perspective, new ideas, and let the people talk from Sweden. And Stockholm is also known to be an open and accessible city. For a couple of years, they launched a concept called Stockholm Open City, and it was to welcome and also highlight all the different ideas, lifestyles, people with different needs, opinions, and condition. And when you look at the working condition in Sweden, it's very high due to a lot of regulation. But in the hospitality industry, there is a sign that will help guests to find places for good working condition where they work with equality and also to prevent discrimination. And it's called Schyssta villkor in Swedish. And just to sum this up, I think travel and tourism might be one of the most important things right now in order to get the relationship and connection with different people, to get those new perspective into people in order to get stronger and to also to meet the different challenges in the world. So with that, I hand over to Rika. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. As she already introduced me, I'm Rika Jean-Francois, and I'm from ITB Berlin. ITB is the largest travel trade show worldwide, and my job is to bring sustainability into mainstream tourism. I try to do that since, 20 years next year. But I think we have been quite successful in giving a platform to sustainability and to diversity. There have been a lot of campaigns and a lot of activism, actually, which was originated at ITB Berlin. So ITB Berlin, as being the largest travel trade show worldwide, has, of course, a responsibility towards society. And that's why, they appointed me as a CSR manager for the trade show, so that we can really help to advocate tourism developments which foster human dignity, security, justice for all participants. So, and my privilege is to use our huge platform, which we have not only in Berlin, but also in other destinations, meanwhile, to discuss also in a controversial way sometimes how to make tourism more sustainable, but also socially more sustainable. So, and of course, as she said, I'm a member of the board of directors of GSCC. I'm very proud to be that. And we also, of course, promote the GSCC criteria at Messe Berlin, at ITB, because we believe that these criteria are really right criteria and there's no greenwashing in them. So, well, what is CSR policies? CSR is corporate social responsibility, but it also really means respecting human rights wherever in the world you do business. And I think that business especially plays a unique role in advancing human rights. And we must really prevent abuse of human rights, and we must also provide remedy in case abuse happens. So I think it's not having a business or also being a tourism destination is not a passive responsibility, but we all should become active. We should all integrate it in all our business activities. And it must be part of your vision, it must be part of your mission, and also your corporate DNA. We already heard Intrepid. They really are one of the best practices. They really do that. And Sweden is also taking it very seriously. But this can happen anywhere in the world. You don't need to be as progressive as Sweden as a state to start doing something, to getting active. So to start, of course, you need to map your stakeholders. It's very important that you have a holistic approach, that you do not just have one CSR manager and that's it. You really also have to look into the whole supply chain and to have a solid strategy, really. And yeah, one thing which has to be said, that there is no human rights. Sometimes people say, okay, we do something for accessible tourism, or we do something for the elderly. But I think all human rights are important. And if you really have a responsible business, then you should look into all parts of social responsibility and human rights, because no human right is more important than another. So, and what do human rights also demand? Human rights also demand to embrace diversity, equity, and inclusion. And of course, there's always the environmental aspect, but the social aspect very often is kind of forgotten or left behind. And human rights action, of course, implements to fight against human trafficking, you know, all the very well-known things like child exploitation, sexual exploitation of children, you know, or any way of sexual harassment. But it's also against all the other discriminations which are there around, you know. And there are three legs, actually. It is what you do in your business, and it is what you try to teach or what you try to tell your customers. And on the third part, it's also the people who live in the destinations. How are they treated? How do you cooperate with them? So there's a lot of things food for thought, actually. And unfortunately, there are in tourism various violations of human rights. And whether it's indigenous property rights, we have that very often, or there is no access to water. There are big swimming pools, but there is no access to water, no access to the beach. You said you have access to the beach. This has to be guaranteed in a way. So you have to find solution for that. And I think there's also still something like a systemic injustice, and we have to how to tackle that. And if you as a business want to start, then you have to think about your workforce, for instance. If you really want to work internationally and tackle to an international crowd, then you also have to diversify your workforce and create equal opportunities for everybody. So and that brings us to the necessity to find new ways of recruiting and hiring, you know, and especially marginalized members of society are still underrepresented in all our businesses. So, as you already said, engage people from different ethnic backgrounds, different age, religion, sexual orientation, medical condition, or displaced people. We have so many displaced people in this world who normally don't find a job. Why not also including them? They will also add. And hire more women. You already said that. Women, but for qualified jobs, because there are a lot of women working in tourism, but not in qualified jobs. There's always that glass ceiling still existing. So, and there's also intersectionality. Well, if you are a black woman and you are a woman, that is already two things. And if you're and if you're also gay, then it is three things. And it makes everything more difficult. So, but diverse management teams bring fresh sets of eyes. So you have to, of course, to fight bias, you have to invest in diversity training. And yeah, you have to lead by example and to lead transformation. I could go on because there are a lot of things I can tell about how to start to be engaged in the field of diversity as a company, as a destination. But we don't have time for that. But there are already good examples. Like you also said that you try to work already. There's the Black Travel Alliance with the where you can find Black people, people of color, working in the tourism industry. Why not take a look into that? Cooperate with them, and cooperate also with NGOs or the associations. I'm also, I was for many years on the board of the IGLJ, the International Gay and Lesbian Travel Association, where you can also find, if you want to cater to a certain group, you really have to be authentic, and you have to ask the people who are involved, the people who suffer in a way, you know. So, yeah, you have to reflect diversity, equity, and inclusion in your marketing activities. Because if you are a Black person, or if you are gay, or whatever you are, and you don't see yourself reflected in any of the ads, why should you go? Why should I travel to a beach where only white straight couples go and have their holiday? I don't feel attracted. So you would have to work on that too. But you need a diverse workforce to do that, because otherwise you wouldn't know how to be authentic. So, yeah, and the bottom line, the hospitality industry by now recognizes the need to reflect the way it operates. Tourism leaders, we are tourism leaders here, all of us. We need to advocate and speak up for human rights and tourism, and the implementation of due diligence policies. And I also want to say that allyship, sometimes people say, why do you talk if you are white? Yeah, allyship is important, and we need allyship everywhere, because as a real ally, it is not lip service, it's support all through the supply chain. And yeah, there's also the roundtable, International Roundtable on Human Rights. If you want to know more about it, we can talk about that later. And I just mentioned it, there are risks and challenges as well, because a lot of times, as when you started, you can't really do it because there are a lot of prejudices, but also there are governments who are not, they don't want to work in the field of LGBT tourism, for instance. But how can we do it? We could just can say, okay, it's not allowed, so that's it. No, we have to be allies, we have to fight for it. We have to, if we want a different world, if we want to be engaged in a real responsibility in tourism, then we have to get over that, you know, take the next step. So, and I try at ITB to help to drive that change, because I really believe that tourism can be a vehicle for change, and can build bridges also in destinations where you don't think it can be. It can build bridges that everybody can be who or he or she or whatever is in our tourism world. So thank you, and sorry for being late.
Should I be your clicker?
Try facing that way. Yep, there you go.
Here you go. Okay. Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me. I'm Antonita from Accor Hotels. I'm based in Brazil. I'm responsible for the Americas region. I'm talking about inclusivity in Accor. So who we are? No? We are not just a hotel company. We believe that we are the world leading of augmented hospitality group. We really want people to come in our hotels and our premises and experience the best things they have in their life. And of course, we are a business made from people to people. And therefore, our main asset are our employees, okay? At a glance, for you to have an idea, we brought a diverse company. We have more than 5,000 hotels around the world, more than 110 countries. Just this for itself brings a lot of culture to our environmental. We have more than 40 brands, which actually is very good because we can have people that can afford travel very economy. We have hostels have very low economy products and also ultra luxury. So we are aimed to bring every kind of people in our hotels, in our restaurants, in our residentials, in our co-workings. We are just not our hotels. Of course, we care also about the environment. We have the target to be net zero company by 2050. More than 85% of our hotels eliminated single plastic materials last year, and we are running this to achieve 100% in the coming years as well. And we instruct our people, our employees regarding sustainability and diversity, equity, inclusion towards a lot of trainings. More than almost 100% of our people are training in those elements. And we are artists, so we don't call ourselves employees or collaborators. We are just artists. Artists is a word combination that art for artists. So we believe that we are aimed to bring the best experience for the people that are with us in our premises. And this makes the group truly unique and placing those experiences to everyone. And we really want to employ people that work with their hearts to bring the best things for our employees. We are more than around 300,000 employees around the world in more, working in more than 300 functions. And that's come to my next information. We are inclusive, of course, because we are welcome to everyone. We believe that diversity brings a lot of value to our environment. The majority of our employees are from the localities where they born, when they speak the languages, when they can bring the culture to our guests. When they are experiencing a country, they also experience culture and diversity and how people behave in that local. They respect the laws, they respect the culture for these places. So like this, our ambition is to prevent also inequalities and discrimination. This is another point that we take very seriously at ACOR, and this comes to our strategy related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's based in mainly 4 pillars. One is the main one, and the one that began our strategy was gender diversity and gender equality. And as you can see, we have targets. We just not are speakers about diversity, equity, inclusion. We walk the talk. We have targets. It's in our bonuses. My bonus is connected to what I can bring, and I have to add value to the communities where we work. So all the executives at senior members, executives are also connected. All the bonuses are connected with the measurements and the targets achieved every year towards the inclusivity as well. So one is, of course, regarding women, and a lot of regarding gender-based violence. We help women that suffer violence around the world. Another one is people with disability. We are very pleased to announce that we are going to support the Paris 2004 Olympic and Paralympic Games as well. We're going to have a team supported by which is our core Live Limit is our lifestyle membership card, and they will support a group of people there. Also, ethnic, racial, and cultural diversity as well. According to the countries, we sponsor indigenous, as we have the example here. We support Black people and other kind of minorities, of course, according to the relation they have within the countries that we behave. And LGBT is another segment. I'm also part of IGLTA, which we partnered in the in the last 2 years. Agility is a very, very responsible institutional that help also hotels to provide experience for that community. LGBT community, it's a community that travels 3 to 4 more times than the relevant other communities. So we want them to be in our hotels and want to employ as well, but we want them to experience things in our hotels. Of course, we do business and we want them to be happy in our hotels. But all of them is just to say that we work in a context that is to offer social opportunities for our people that we call at the core social elevator. We want to become social elevator for a lot of countries because we did a lot of researches internally and we see a big gap between the basic employees, the management and a senior level. That's a lot of gaps in terms of education and we want to promote that. I think this is important to promote education. Therefore, we can promote better recruitment, we can work with excellence, we can brand our positioning, and also we're going to monitor the impact to capitalize best practices. It's very important for us to monitor everything we do, to have KPIs. We're not just talking, we walk the talk, so that's for all our projects have also ways to manage, and that's why we end up with this pyramid. Very pretty basic, but this is something we must do. It seems basic, but we need to do that. It's not in place already. So we want to recruit and privilege people. We want to be able to boost their career development and help them to go and grow up within the company and get the high potentials to promote in order to achieve the leadership. It's very difficult to have a leadership member in our company nowadays that came from lower levels of the organization. We also always have to bring people outside the company to that leadership positions, and this is what we want to change in the next. And as I say, this is our priorities. That's what I mentioned. Everything has targets, so we want to accelerate our actions towards gender division. So we want to employ our targets to have 40% of women in management position and also hotels positions. We want to include refugees in our hotels. 2% of every country must have refugees employed, also disabled people. So everything that we do is measured, and in the end, we also want to celebrate, because we must celebrate our achievements, the dates, and people that work for us. So that's it. Thank you very much. Where did you point it?
No, I need to go. We're working. Hi everyone, my name's Cherise Suddensall. I wear many hats at the moment, but today I'm representing the not-for-profit Regenerative Vanuatu alongside my colleague Jerry Spooner, who's the Executive Director, and we're lucky enough at the very last minute to have him fly all the way from Vanuatu. I hope everyone in this room knows Vanuatu and where it is. If not, quickly look it up. But today we're actually presenting on inclusivity of the host destination, particularly the Indigenous peoples of the Pacific, using a case study of Vanuatu. The other hats I wear is I'm a research fellow for the Sunshine Coast University, a member of the Australian Centre for Pacific Islands Research, who funded me to be able to present today, so I'm very grateful to them. And I'm a project leader for the Australian Centre for International Agricultural Research. So the research from that centre led to the development of the NGO. So we're very happy to see research leading to positive outcomes, practical ones. So before I commence, I just want to acknowledge and pay respect to the Indigenous peoples of the larger ocean states of the Pacific and their continuing connection to the Pacific Ocean, their lands, their culture and communities. Without them, we wouldn't have this research to present today. But also I want to acknowledge the increasing struggles that they are going through at no fault to their own. They really have lived very sustainable and regenerative lifestyles, but they're at the cold face of climate change now. And actually, at the moment, many are losing their lands. So, Regenerative Vanuatu, it's a not-for-profit organisation. It was formally registered in 2021 in Vanuatu, but it now represents the Pacific Islands and has a board of members representing the Pacific countries. So the vision is to support climate-smart, resilient rural Indigenous communities by restoring pride in Indigenous food culture and strengthening connection to Vanuatu through regenerative agritourism. So Vanuatu, it has many different terms throughout the Pacific, but in Vanuatu, Vanuatu is described as the land area one is identified with, which encompasses the people, their traditions and customs, beliefs and values, and the various other institutions established for the sake of achieving harmony, solidarity and prosperity within a particular social context. It provides a sense of identity and belonging. The Vanuatu is an extension of the concept of the self. And for example, in Vanuatu, over 80% of the population are still living within their Vanua. It's a customary land title that they're born into. So there's a lot of talk about regenerative at the moment. I've even seen a lot of defensive talk, particularly on LinkedIn, and it's now starting to be published that people are almost feeling threatened by the term regenerative, that it's another buzzword for sustainable or it's replacing sustainable. Regenerative is not replacing sustainable. Every business, everyone in their life should be aiming to be sustainable. That should be our minimum standards now with what we're facing. But regenerative builds on from sustainable, and it's very much, at the core of it is adaptation to climate change. But regenerative systems thinking is very much based on Indigenous knowledge systems, and it's really important that we recognise the Indigenous people and their knowledge systems that's leading to this incredible movement. I've got an example here from a community we've been working with to develop a regenerative agritourism experience on Maivo. This is Chief Freddie, and he said, if you benefited at the expense of anyone or anything, including future generations, you are not regenerative. It's more than just minimising impact or only leaving footprints. It's about transformational experiences between host and guest that contributes to the regeneration of each other's Vanua. So he believes when visitors come to visit them, they will better respect their own Vanua when they return home. So I think that's a really interesting point, that he sees how much knowledge they have to teach others and how we can adapt to climate change. However, these Indigenous knowledge systems are under threat. People are leaving their Vanua through increased urbanisation, which is mostly fueled by tourism. Tourism in the Pacific is mostly in the urban areas, and it's largely foreign owned and managed. Also, they're increasingly needing access to health services, etc., that are in these urban areas, and I'll go into that in a few slides. But urbanisation is increasing vulnerability and impacting on resilience that Indigenous people have through their Vanua. We're also now seeing a high dependence on imported food as they no longer have access to their lands to grow their food. And we're seeing with that a decrease in the consumption of available fresh food and an increase in NCDs. Over 20% of the population has diabetes now in Vanuatu. We're also seeing increased land tenure disputes of Vanua as people are starting to look at leasing to be able to finance their different lifestyles. So we define regenerative Indigenous agritourism as an ecologically and socially inclusive model of agritourism that's based on the interpretation of climate-smart regenerative traditional agro-ecosystems, which exhibit cultural and heritage significance and support climate resilience. So we see regenerative Indigenous operators as acting as ambassadors of transformational journeys to decolonise and regenerate their Vanua. Experiences are not primarily for international visitors. The operators act as ambassadors, tailoring experiences to support positive behaviour change. And this is targeted at local youth as well as community and domestic tourists. And we even have donor organisations now such as World Vision that are contracting our regenerative Indigenous operators to work on behaviour change with communities. So communities and schools are doing these tours, which is a really fantastic outcome. So the theme of today is tourism as a potential to be a transformative force for social and economic development, but it must be inclusive and accessible. But we believe for it to really be transformative, inclusivity and accessibility must apply to both the host. It's not just about the tourists having inclusivity or accessibility for tourists. So we see it as a strategy, regenerative agritourism as a strategy to support meaningful engagement of Indigenous people in tourism. And by meaningful, we mean they're owning their operations, they're managing them, it's based on their worldview and their knowledge systems. We're not trying to put them into a Western style of tourism, which we're really seeing is impacting on them negatively. So enhancing accessibility. Rural areas in Vanuatu and many islands in the Pacific, they're really inaccessible to both Indigenous people and visitors with disabilities. So Regenerative Vanua has developed the first standards for accessible and inclusive agritourism, and we're piloting that in Vanuatu in the second half of this year. These standards are based on the GSTC, but we build on from the GSTC, applying the principles of regenerative. And these very much standards in there about protection of IP. The Indigenous people in this research are really concerned about people relaying their knowledge systems without permission, etc., profiteering off this. And we've seen this with traditional medicinals and pharmaceutical companies throughout the Pacific. So improving accessibility for visitors with disabilities, it will improve the quality of life for Indigenous host communities. They will be able to remain in their vanua even when they do have accessibility issues. This is so important. The Pacific has a public health emergency. It's really dire. They have the highest rates of NCDs globally. As I said, over 20% are suffering from diabetes. But for example, in Vanuatu, these 2 amputations a week of a population of 300,000 people. So you can see how dire this is. And these increase in areas such as Tonga and Samoa. So we see our approach as a preventative approach. We're not just about accessibility, we're about decreasing disabilities. So many Indigenous people with disabilities are forced to relocate away from their vanua into urban areas to access health services, etc. The flow-on effect is they take their family with them and the cycle begins where they're not attached to their vanua anymore, their social support systems, they're unable to grow their food and they're eating the imported food that got them to that place. So through our programs, we're supporting Indigenous agritourism operators to meet accessibility standards, to enable people with disabilities to remain in their homes, in their vanua. But we're also working with operators to be ambassadors for change, to bring pride back into local food and farming systems, to get them off the imported food and to live a healthier lifestyle. And just to finish up, we're extremely excited and proud that the program in 2021 won the Island Innovations Award for the significant impact it's had in the 3 years it's been operating. And we're really excited to be taking this out throughout the Pacific Islands now. So thanks for having us, and my colleague will be answering some questions as well.
Jerry, do you have a mic? You do.
Yeah.
Great. Great. Thank you to all our speakers. But to continue on, given we are lucky enough to have Jerry joining us, Jerry, do you want to tell us, in your words, how your approach is different to other certification organisations?
Good morning, everyone. Morning, everyone. For regenerative Vanua, we first of all understand and value the importance and the role certification plays in connecting good experiences with potential travelers. What we bring to the table, and that makes us different, is addressing the issue of complexity and the cost of certification for Indigenous people, and that is our main audience that we want to work with. And as Cherise has highlighted in her presentation, we, through the work Regenerative Vanua is doing, our original focus has been on just Vanuatu, but she's also highlighted also the interest from other regional small island country members to be part of the program. So our model that we believe we're taking a different approach to addressing the issue of certification for Indigenous peoples is working with government to subsidize costs for getting operators to Indigenous communities to be involved and to work towards certification, to help them with costs from the trainings, including the GSTC trainings that they'd be required to go through, to the auditor's costs and the certification cost itself, with the idea in that they not just become ambassadors, like Cherise has mentioned too. We educate our communities in a way where they realize their traditional knowledges that we are wanting to use as experiences are put together, and that they can showcase with pride, that can address a lot more issues than just to attract visitors to Vanuatu.
And your programs and standards, are just focused on agritourism. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
So the whole story around why we've just gone and focused on agritourism is I think you've heard Cherise mention Vanua. Vanua is the whole system itself, culture and community together. So indigenous peoples, not just Vanuatu, but for the Pacific, can identify themselves through a particular Vanua. And the Vanuas itself, together as a region, forms a family Vanua. So for regenerative Vanua, your question is how I would answer it is we see the program, the value in the program, why we've just decided to focus on agritourism. That is because in the idea of bringing pride back into indigenous peoples through the Vanuas, we see it more as a resilient strategy. Yeah? So when we talk about Vanua, using those experiences, using the indigenous people's indigenous traditional knowledges that we can't teach them those knowledges. It's knowledges that's been passed on to them for generations. That has been there for quite some time now, but getting them to understand that these traditional knowledges, the system of food, farming, the practice of traditional farming, to harvesting, the preparation, preserving of food, and presenting it for their families and their loved ones, and eventually using that as a draw card, building on those experiences for visitors, is what we're seeing more. That it's not just focused on tourism, but as a strategy. And I think it was highlighted earlier too. In the face of climate change, we see this program as a resilient strategy, because we also have highlighted and have linked our program to tick off objectives within climate change, within the Ministry of Health, within the Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of Education, Ministry of Tourism. So it's a program that gets everyone together, that are excited to see how we can use our traditional knowledges through our communities to use the program, the agritourism program, to help guide government in terms of prioritizing when talking about infrastructure. Inclusivity for us in Vanuatu, especially for rural communities, should be about getting the host sorted. And so when visitors come, they can enjoy it too. But if the hosts are not looked after, it's a different kind of experience that and approach that we look at developing and getting communities involved. So I think it's more using that, getting them, our indigenous peoples, to revive and maintain pride, keep them in their communities so they keep and look after their lands and they look after themselves. And I was very interested to hear from one of the presenters yesterday. I forgot to take her name down, but she mentioned the experience visitors are going to, their experience will be determined when coming into a community, that it's obvious that the community is looked after, they value themselves, they have pride in themselves. That gives them real authentic, it adds to the authentic experience. So, and I think that's why agritourism for us, Vanuatu, and the other Pacific Island countries, why we believe that is our focus. Yeah.
Great, thank you very much. And we're pleased to have you join the panel. Because to all perspectives, you're bringing a bit more diversity to a panel that perhaps at the start didn't look too diverse. So, Rika, I'm coming to you with a question. You know, we were talking about how do you represent diversity. Can you share with us your thoughts on people who are not from marginalised communities speaking up for DEI? And what are the challenges in that? And how do we really make sure we get everybody engaged? Rika?
Sorry, I was just
Yes.
reading the questions. Sorry,
Yes.
sorry, I'm so sorry.
That's all right. I was asking how you feel about getting other people engaged in the conversation, not necessarily from the marginalised communities. You know, going back to our conversation about do we have enough diversity on this panel?
Yeah. I think that's exactly what I also tried to mention in my presentation, that it's a process in any case. But if we who are engaged and are really have a passion for it, if we don't speak up because we think we are not allowed because do not belong to this and that community, then it doesn't make sense. Okay, I might count myself part of one community, but you might call yourself part of another community. And we are, well, we are all women here, except a few, which is also not very common. Normally, there are a lot of all male panels, and we try to work against that too. No, but in general, I think that this allyship is so important that, as I said before, because you know, there are a lot of discussions even I mean, especially in Northern Europe, where you talk about whether it's cultural appropriate to wear like an Indian sari, for instance. I travel a lot to India and I have a lot of Indian clothes. And people in India really have a nice perception of it. They say, oh, thank you for recognizing our culture. And I want to support their culture and give visibility to their culture. And because I think that cotton clothes are the only thing to wear in a hot climate like in India. So, but in some discussions, people would say that is cultural and appropriate because you are not Indian. You shouldn't be taking things of other cultures which do not belong to you. I really understand the discussion because there has been so much systemic racism in this world that I understand that people really have to be aggressive sometimes, you know. And I really also understand why don't we have any people, anybody. But the reality still is that the workforce in most of the country, we can count how many people of color do we have at this conference. And this is not because anybody doesn't want it, but it's because there are not so many people working in the field of tourism. And why? Because there is no equality and access yet. And that's why exactly I was trying to speak up and also give this a little summary of what all of us can do to become allies or to work in that field, so that yeah, I think it is not okay not to speak up because you think this is inappropriate.
Thank you. So we will move to Slido now. Unless, did anybody have anything to add to that one? No? So I'll go to the first question from Coco. Thank you, Coco, for the question. So like the rest of sustainability, inclusivity needs to be measured as well. So the question is about, is there any good way to measure performance and make the data comparable when we talk to inclusivity? And Toniasha, you've set very strong targets at Accor.
Mhm.
Do you want to talk about how you measure the performance and then?
Yes, well, well, in terms of the framework, we have a framework based on ESGs, not only diversity, equity, inclusion. So it's pretty based on ESG, and then we have tools.
We seem to have lost Antoinette. Actually, can we there's a hand mic you can.
Is that on?
Hi.
Yep.
Well,
Yeah.
okay, thanks. So we have like systems to measure things mainly related to the environment part, you know, and DNI. What we are doing, for example, now, as example in Brazil, we are doing like a census. So we are checking, you know, who are in our fields, you know, which people are member of every community, so we can basically find the baseline and data. So what is lacking, and also because we have some laws, or the LGBT laws against, you know, collecting data from people, this is becoming difficult to have information from our staff. You know, it's basically when they want to provide information, okay? But we trying to build this baseline of people and also to set up targets for hotels. So we have targets to employ women, we have targets to employ Black people or indigenous or other minority communities or even LGBT according to the countries where there's the possibility or not. We also have targets to employ disabled people. So we are kind of building this framework in order to promote more inclusivity, because we can rely on them to do by themselves, because of course we have a lot of other, you know, situations in hotels, and we want to promote that. So now we are in the phase of getting this baseline and getting everybody on board of that. So I think we'll be able to, for next year, for example, to be compared. And we compared regions by regions in terms of targets, okay? For example, and every year we have targets. For example, this year, everybody has the target of employee 40% of women in every country and every, we call hobby, which is a region. So my region is, which is Americas. We must have 40% of women in management position in our hotels. So this is part of our bonus, as I mentioned before. So, and then every year we're going to include more targets. I don't know if I answered.
Linda, do you have something to add?
Absolutely. Yes, in terms of a business, I think it's very important to measure inclusion at all. And in order to get the comparison and also to set the importance of sustainability towards the financial figure is always good to measure. Though the inclusion figure can be quite sensitive. In Sweden, we have this authority that can help companies to make measurements regarding your background and where you come from, and it's very sensitive, but it's managed, and the businesses get back the percentage level, so you get a situation, an analysis of what the current situation is at the company, and then you can set targets and you know how to move forward. And it's really important, I guess, if you compare to the larger standards or the frameworks that we have in sustainability. I mean, one of the most important is the equality in terms of men and women in the board, for example, if you have it in that level, because that is really important to also to drive change on a top level in the larger companies. So I think it's very important to measure in all kind of way, but also to get the overview of the situation, so you know how to move and transform.
I think that leads nicely on to the second question we've got from Susanna about hiring processes, and particularly when it comes to data, and data privacy is becoming even, you know, a significant issue for us to address now. How do you include diversity and inclusion in the hiring process outside of gender, when data protection doesn't necessarily allow us to ask about some of the other ways people might identify? Linda, do you have thoughts on how
I'm
you
just
do that?
thinking. It's
Yeah.
difficult. I know I've read about some artificial intelligence here, where you have you get help in the recruitment process of actually not giving any perspective of, so you can kind of have another perspective into the recruitment process. But it's quite difficult because you don't want to put people in one group and still you want to recruit one specific group. So, but I know that probably the development of the data and technology will help us, but still it's about culture and how you attract people to one company, because it's also about recruiting, but it's also to make people feel good when they are at a workplace and in a business. So
I think it might, yeah, sorry. It might be important to name it, speak out. I mean, use this inclusive language and name it. Say that you are open for everybody. And then also cooperate with associations where you know that people are organized, or how do you see that?
Yes, if I can complement, for example, we go in fairs, in students' fairs, I mean, when those people apply for a lot of companies, and of course we communicate about our inclusivity programs through influencers, through the media, through our marketing campaigns as well. So people know that. Actually, is very interesting because a lot of people that we recruited in the past 3 years actually select the core not for the salary, because of course you know that tourism salaries are not the best compared to other markets, especially in functions that are not hoteliers function. It's more like a support business, for example. And they choose a core because they heard about it and saw about our diversity, equity, and inclusion campaigns, towards all the communications. And we own a lot of great place to work, for women to work, to first employee, to LGBT people to work. We won those awards in a round of countries. So this promotes as well, and people know, and students, especially the young generation, wants to work in environments that are open to everybody. So this also is how the way we promote ourselves using those tools as well.
Yeah, I would agree. At Intrepid, it's a very big source of the way we attract people through having the purpose. But I guess the flip side is, how do we address that unconscious bias in the people doing the recruitment, that even once we attract those people, how do we make sure they're still given that fair chance? And I know there has been a lot of discussion in people at HR circles about kind of the blind CVs, taking out the names, because we know people with more different or more ethnic names have a much lower chance of getting a response. How do we take out the names, take out the gender, take out anything identifying, so we can really look at the core of what the person is bringing to us? Do you guys at Accor, have you investigated that?
That's very interesting. We actually developed a guideline for the recruitment people, either in our headquarters and either in our hotels, to how to recruit, for example, LGBT people, because these are the most sensitive, or even when we recruit transgenders, which is even more sensitive, and just to avoid questions like, are you married, or what's the name of your husband and wife? So just to distinguish those traditional families, and be very careful about personal questions and what they do, So, and this was very helpful for them, because they didn't know how to approach those people, especially, and calling the names. And we also do those trainings for how to receive those people in our hotels. Okay, so do we need to explain for the people where these people coming from? And sometimes they have a lot of issues, and in terms of family issues, of psychological issues, and we have to really help them. And it's part of our social elevator that I presented, is to help those people to find a place in the society and be accepted as well. A lot of times they are not accepted in their families, but they are accepted in the companies they work for. So that's very important for us as well.
Okay, the next question is a big one, and it is about accessibility, inclusion. You know, as we've seen, we've already just on this panel had many different perspectives in addressing accessibility and inclusion. Like much of sustainability, I think it can be overwhelming if you haven't started. So I'd open up to anybody in the panel who wants to jump in. How should organisations who haven't taken that first step, how can they start on their journey? Linda?
Okay, but I think it's always good to start off to know where you're at, and especially as you mentioned also what you want to stand for. So two processes, you have to find out the situation and how the workplace is, what are the situation and what do you want to accomplish, and really ground that, because then when you start to define different goals and measurements, you really need to have the right type of goals in order to transform the organization. And I mean, the culture and the people behind it should also be aware of what you want to accomplish. So it's both development the culture and make it happen in the culture as well, as much as driving and understanding figures where you are at, I say. I don't know if you have.
Yes, well, I can say that, well, this is slightly complicated because nowadays a lot of companies are pressured to be in that field because of financial assets, because they need to, find credits. But ESG is a lot of connection now, has a lot of connection with financial credits. So companies must have to be really careful with that to not end up in greenwash or pinkwash or not. So I think for the first thing is that the board of the company, the CEO, must be really engaged in that. So it must be top down, that decision. If you don't have the board engaged on that, it will be very difficult to go down with really, in deep, to be perceived as trusted, and transparent with the rest of our organization. So that all the actions you have to, speak the way you do, and not only theoretical, but also practical things. So I think first thing is engage the board. And obviously, we never have reinvented the wheel, and to start this at the core. For example, we rely on consultants. There's a lot of experts in the field, IGLTA, for example, and other institutions that can provide you guidelines. You don't need to create yourself. There's a lot of material, and a great institution. I think you find a good institutional consultant to support you, to open the doors for you as well. It will be very helpful.
Yeah, but I think every little step counts, and sometimes I'm afraid that people would say, "Oh no, this is such a mountain in front of me." So, but even if you just work as a team member in a company, if you start to speak up and discuss with your teammates and introduce it to the management, and then they will see that there is something going on, and yeah, try to do that.
Yes, and I could just add, because one of the most common key indicators, performance indicator, I mean, it's the board level, how you equal the board is. That every company, a larger company in Europe at least, will have to report from next year. So, I mean, if you start from the top and ask questions, I mean, this is something that will help as a first step, I would say.
There was another question I saw pop up there, moving around, which is, once you attract people from diverse backgrounds, how do you ensure their safety? And I think there are different, their safety, their feeling of being welcome and well-being in the workplace. And I think there are some different examples of that, either if you're talking about the LGBT community in some countries where it's still not accepted, in some cases still illegal. How do we make those people safe and secure in the workplace? Another example that we've come across is starting to try to work more with Indigenous people. We know that for the first Indigenous person coming into a workplace that's predominantly not, how do you not put all the pressure on them to be kind of carrying the flag? Any kind of thoughts from the panel?
I can go. Is mine working?
Yep.
Okay. Something that we've been trying to introduce in the Pacific is critical thinking and trying to unlearn the norms that you may not think you have, that way of thinking that's been a story we were grown up with, but it is inherently prejudiced or potentially racist or sexist, and you're not even realizing that you have that thought pattern. And we see that a lot with our expatriate investors in the Pacific. Just the certain comments they will say or the way that they hire, etc., and they're not really realizing the way that that's coming across. So, yeah, we call it and it's part of regenerative philosophy as well, is an unlearning of the worldview and knowledge system you have, and then relearning one that's based on critical thinking. Am I actually thinking in a way that's supporting equality, inclusion, etc., or is this potentially a biased pattern of thought that I've just been inherited into? So it's not just about having measures or tick boxes or, oh, yep, I've met that because I've got this many people working here. You literally have to go inside of yourself and support that thinking amongst not just you but your team as well to really assess your way of thinking and approaches. Did you want to answer?
Yeah, I have an example from a larger company in Sweden where I worked, and where we worked very much with gender equality, and we wanted to change that and be more gender equal. But in one of the offices in Sweden, it was really bad situation in the culture. It was discrimination and a lot of bad things ongoing. And in terms of recruitment, you have to really make up with a bad situation before you can recruit more people. And this was just gender equality, I would say. But what we did was that we had different workshops and dialogue and made people understand each other. It sounds very simple, but probably that's where it lies. You have different opinion of different people and you think it is in one way, but the dialogue really helped. And when that dialogue was formed, and we could take step further, and then we had a more better culture in order to take next step. So you also have to work with the issues and challenges that you have already in the organization before you start new recruitment. And so that's really important, I would say.
Great. Rika, we might come to you for the next one. So ITB and GSTC, are they proactive in, you talked a bit about human rights in your presentation, but are they proactive in encouraging change in destinations where aspects of human rights are shown to not be protected?
Yeah, I think that's a very important question, which is heavily discussed also in tourism right now, because I mean, we all believe also in the board of IGLTA or other minority organizations that boycotting destinations which are conservative is not the answer. Because, as I said, if you go into a destination and search also the contact of the communities living in that destination, you can maybe help to open a door and to foster change. But if you just say, no, I won't go there because it is too conservative, you will also leave the communities over there alone who might be waiting for tourism to come and open up a new world, a more open world for them. So what do we do? I mean, we have discussions like that in every country. I mean, wherever we go, we would have this discussion also from GSDC. We will at ITB, we have to really face this problematic issue because we always have a host country, as you all might know, And some of those host countries who are really well-recognized tourism destinations have issues, for instance, with LGBT people. What do we do? Or they are not interested in gender equality. You know, this is one of the issues as well. Of course, every destination, every place has its own history, and I cannot interfere and say, well, in my belief, everybody's equal, women are equal, and you have to do it this and that way. But what we can do is maybe open up minds, because I believe that human rights are over any other rights, and that's also concerning women. But of course, there are different historical beliefs and religious beliefs, which I have to respect, but only to a certain level. And I want to have these discussions. So if you are in a country where human rights are abused, but you want to be on the tourism sector, you have to commit at least that you will be working on it. To become a host country now of ITB, you have to sign kind of a commitment that you are going to work on it, that you will look into human rights issues, that you will be working on a master plan, and that you will be ready to answer questions. Because if you are on a international stage and there are human rights abuses, heavily human rights abuses in your country, then you have to be ready to answer questions. And we will not guarantee, and GSTC as well, guarantee that no uncomfortable questions will be asked. You know, so I think the process is really helping people, because people in tourism normally are not conservative. They are more open because, you know, traveling is against any bigotry. So these people will be open and they can be your allies, and sometimes they really wait for you. I've had discussions where the tourism industry in quite conservative countries have asked me, please, come and have this discussion because we want to become more open. And yeah, I believe in tourism as a door opener, but sometimes it's very delicate. But you need to persist and to ask these questions. That doesn't mean if we have a host country which is not 100% respecting human rights, that this country shouldn't be on a global stage. But ask questions. Ask them to make plans to change that.
And I noticed a couple of questions, one from Peggy asking about the GSTC criteria. And I think it's important to point out that the GSTC criteria do include not only environmental issues when it comes to sustainability, but social ones as well. And I think B2, B5, B6, B7 are all around, you know, access to employment, human rights, the rights of workers. So it's definitely included within the criteria. Often in sustainability, and I struggle this within my workplace as well, because sustainability is so broad, it's a matter of getting that balance on not only the environmental side and impacts, but also the social side. So how do people, we've only got a few minutes left, but maybe just to finish off on the point about balancing that need of social impact in terms of sustainability alongside the environmental impacts. Therese or Jerry, I'm not sure if you've got some thoughts on it. We might just hear final couple of thoughts from each panellist before we wrap up.
Sorry, can you repeat the question again?
So in terms of the balancing of sustainability, the social side, which is, well, the diversity, the inclusion, the access, balancing that alongside the environmental impacts. And in the Pacific, there are major environmental issues for sustainability in terms of the climate change, but how do you see the importance of balancing the social side as well? Linda, do you want to jump in and then we'll come back?
Yeah, but I think it's very important if you're an organization or a company that you understand in a short term what risk you have and try to focus both on short term but also on long term and try to divide and balance the different differences in the three, both the environmental, the social and the governance, because it's very difficult and challenging working with sustainability because you want to do everything, but you really have to see to what risk do I have, what must I do in the first place, and then try to understand the perspective on a long term, but also understand in all of the three dimensions what you need to do the first step. And I think that is the balance you need to do as the first step.
Anybody else want to jump in on that one? Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think in the context of the Pacific, really what we have is two very different kind of tourism industry stakeholders. We've got the expatriates and foreign investors, and then we've got the local population. And I witnessed a really good example when Jerry was the former director of tourism, and he was very much about having his people have more inclusion in meetings and so forth. They're very shy-natured, especially the rural populations, but they'd be put in a room with very vocal, confident expatriates from countries such as France, Australia, New Zealand. And often the local Indigenous people really wouldn't have much of a voice in those meetings. So Jerry managed that in a way of everyone has one chance to say something to make it good, and he would manage the voices, but also really trying to communicate social nuances, such as if the whole room of Indigenous people say yes to you, they probably no. It's really, they're just trying to get you out of the room as quick as possible because they're finding it intimidating or so forth. So it's really, and again, this is why we went from the perspective of host. I think it's not so much about the needs of guests or the needs of the foreign investors and meeting targets, etc. You really must understand the context that you're operating in, whether you're a visitor coming there, whether you're an investor setting up in tourism. If you want to talk about inclusion, it must be on the terms of the country in where you are actually setting up and operating in, and ensuring that you're working within their worldview. And that's how you will ensure real meaningful inclusion. And I think that will then stem on to the type of people you're attracting to your tourism destination.
Great. And that's it. I've got a red sign telling me that time's up. I know there are more questions there. I'm sure the panelists are going to be happy to hang around and have a conversation if anybody in the room still has a burning question. And I would like to thank you all for joining us, but importantly, please join me in thanking our panelists, Linda, Rika, Antonetta, Charisse and Jerry.